Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started here. It is 3:30 in the Midwest. My name is Marshall Conley. I'm a senior consultant with REL Midwest, and I'm happy to have you all here today to talk about conducting relevant research through networked improvement communities. And we have a great program for you this afternoon, and as I can see that many of you are sharing in the chat, and that is great, and keep doing so. Before we get into our session, a little housekeeping about our platform here, Zoom. If you're not already connected to the audio, you can click the Join Audio button in the toolbar, which should be at the bottom of your screen. To do that, you can either use the phone or listen through your computer. There's a chat, which most of you have found, and this is where we like you to introduce yourself. You can also pose your questions there. We are going to have a panel later. We have a couple of presenters in a panel, and so we want to make sure to make this as interactive. So please feel free to use that for questions or for technical issues. And also, we're fortunate enough to have live closed captioning available to us today. There is a closed caption button available to you if you need the captions or would just like to follow along with them. Please click that and use that feature. All right. So today I am lucky to be joined by two colleagues. First, Amy Fagan, a senior researcher from REL Midwest. She's going to talk with us a little bit today about networked improvement communities. And Joanna Seymour, a technology integrationist from Dike New Hartford Schools in Iowa, who has been a participant in our networked improvement community, and is going to chat with me a little bit later on about that experience and how lessons learned and how it's been going. And as you can see here, there I am, Marshall, your host today. Our agenda, as I mentioned, pretty straightforward. First, Amy's going to talk to us about NICs, network improvement communities, with a focus on the collaborative research aspects of it in the authentic settings. I'm going to give you an overview of our project, our network improvement community, and then we will have the practitioner perspective. So I'm going to chat, as I mentioned, chat with Joanna about our experiences in the NIC, and then you'll have a chance to get your questions answered from any of us. First, though, I know we have a mixed group, so a little bit about who we are. So we are REL Midwest Regional Education Laboratory. We're part of a network of 10 regional education labs funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. We serve 7 states in the Midwest: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And what we're really interested in, what our mission really is to do, is to address the priorities and interests of our partners in the states, and do so through supporting research alliances and this network improvement community, as well as some other interesting collaborations. And so we work in partnership with practitioners in those states to conduct applied research and provide training, coaching, and technical support. And our mission is really focused on this supporting a more evidence-based education system. And as you can see, we do this at the state level. We work with some districts. We work with other organizations in the states. Wherever the needs and the interests align, we're there to provide that support. And as I mentioned, we do this through these partnerships. So we have 5 research alliances and a network improvement community. Those are listed here. The Teacher Prep Alliance is based in with our partners in Wisconsin. Teacher Prep is based with our partners in Michigan. The Achievement Gap Research Alliance works with Wisconsin to address that issue. The Career Readiness Alliance, it talks about integrating career readiness and pathways with an explicit focus in Minnesota on Native American student populations and rural students. The Early Childhood partnership is with our partners in Illinois, and then we do also have this Midwest Alliance to improve knowledge utilization and effective strategies for increasing the uptake of research. So that's a small snapshot of the work that REL Midwest is doing right now with our partners. I encourage all of you to go to our website to learn more about those opportunities and engage with some of the materials there. So we are, as you can see here, the Iowa Learning and Technology Networked Improvement Community, and that's the partnership that we're going to focus on today. And first, before we dig into the details of that partnership, I'm going to pass to Amy, and she's going to talk a little bit about what network improvement communities are, how they function, and give some context for what we'll talk about later on. So thanks. Go ahead, Amy, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes or so orienting us to networks improvement communities, referred to as NICs. And the idea is that this will provide a foundation for Marshall's subsequent presentation and also our conversation about the Iowa NIC specifically. Next slide. Okay. Many of you may already know what a networks improvement community is, or at least you've heard the term. NICs are not at all a new idea. They originated in the fields of industrial organization and healthcare, but only recently have they emerged in education. Over the past 3 to 5 years, they've gained a lot of traction. We've seen a lot of new NICs merging across the country to address a range of problems of practice in education. Next slide. NICs have been seen as a solution to what some see as the limitation of traditional approaches to research, such as randomized controlled trials. So these approaches tend to focus on whether or not an intervention works. They often provide little information about why the intervention might work or for whom. So NICs are different because they test interventions across varied contexts to determine what works, when, for whom, and under what sets of circumstances. So in doing so, NICs provide information about interventions that's much more useful to practitioners who are considering implementing a particular intervention in their context. Next slide. NICs comprise groups of individuals, such as teachers, or organizations, which could be schools, school districts, or pretty much any other kind of organization you could think of, intermediate school districts, for example. They're all working together to address a common problem of practice. And this work is coordinated by an organization that's referred to as the hub. So to give an example, the NIC may comprise several school districts, say, working together to improve student achievement. And the work of these districts could be coordinated by an organization like REL Midwest. And this is the case with the Iowa NIC that we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into in a little bit. Next slide. So according to Tony Brake and colleagues in the book Learning to Improve, which is really a foundational text for this work, NICs have 4 defining features. I'm going to go through each of these so we can really get a good sense of what this is all about. And the first defining feature is that they're focused on a well-specified aim. Associates in process improvement identify 3 improvement questions that guide the work of the NIC. And the first question is, what specifically are we trying to accomplish? By answering this question, participants set an aim to guide their work. What's really important about this is that the aim is specific and measurable. So an example to make this concrete. If the focus of the NIC is on improving literacy, an aim that's specific and measurable might be by 2020, the % of 3rd graders reading at grade level will increase from 60% to 80%. So this aim provides a time frame by 2020. It suggests a target population, 3rd graders. And in addition, it specifies a measurable target for improvement by providing very specific numbers for the expected increase, 60% to 80%. Next slide. So the second defining feature of a NEC is that it's guided by a deep understanding of the problem. Next slide. Albert Einstein famously said, if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. And indeed, this is the case in NICS that we need to spend a lot of time up front understanding the problem, or we can't find a solution. So some questions that NICS participants may ask themselves to identify and define the problem are, what problem of practice should be addressed? How do you know it's a problem? What current efforts are in place to address the problem? How might a NIC propel these efforts, supporting ongoing work, but not adding to it? Next slide. One way to better understand the problem is by conducting a root cause analysis. This is also sometimes referred to as a causal systems analysis. But what it does is it focuses participants on answering why questions. Specifically, why does this problem occur? Participants keep asking why until they have a deep understanding of the factors that contribute to the problem. One way sometimes you may see a root cause analysis carried out is using a fishbone diagram, and that's just a tool to help enumerate the different contributing factors to a problem. Next slide. The third defining feature of NICS is that they're disciplined by the rigor of improvement science, which is a method and set of tools for solving a specific problem. So what this method involves is repeated mini experiments in which interventions are tested through some kind of continuous improvement process. Here we're going to talk about plan, do, study, act cycles. You may have heard variations on this. I've heard often in schools, I've heard teachers or school leaders talk about plan, do, check, act cycles, or plan, do, review cycles. Regardless of what you call it or the specific type of continuous improvement process, what's really important is that the users of the intervention are fully engaged in the testing process. In contrast to traditional approaches to research in which the external researchers are the ones who are responsible for carrying out the evaluation. Next slide. So the first phase of the PDSA cycle is plan. And this is often the most involved stage. During plan, participants develop the foundation for the work of the NIC. They begin by identifying an intervention or change in practice that addresses one or more root causes of the problem. Earlier, I had mentioned about the 3 core improvement questions. The second improvement question is, what change might we introduce and why? So here's where the change comes in. And it doesn't have to be a radical change. It can simply be a small shift in practice. Often when we hear the word intervention, we think about a large-scale program. And that doesn't have to be the case. It can be, like I said, just a shift in practice, a change in the classroom routine, for example. But what's most important is that the change in practice directly addresses the root causes underlying the problem, and it's motivated by a theory about why the intervention might work. After identifying the intervention, participants make predictions about what they expect will happen, and they develop a plan for monitoring progress. So you don't know a change is actually an improvement unless you're monitoring progress, and that brings us to the third and final improvement question is, how will we know that change is an actual improvement? Measures of improvement should be tied to the theory of improvement developed earlier, and importantly, they should be practical. So you may have heard the term practical measures, and what that means is that they're part of regular routines in the classroom, say, or in schools, and they're not a burden to implement. Sometimes short surveys like exit tickets in the classroom work really well. Then the final step at this stage is to be as deliberate and specific as possible in planning for the implementation of the intervention. Participants should develop a detailed implementation plan, considering who will be involved, the specific roles of those involved, how often the group will meet to discuss the intervention, and the projected timeline. Next slide. So now is the time to implement the intervention, the fun part. And throughout implementation, participants are collecting data to monitor improvement using the practical measures developed during the plan phase. Next slide. After implementing the intervention for a specified period, and it's usually not too long, sometimes 4 to 6 weeks or potentially shorter, participants in the NIC come back together to analyze data and interpret findings. Typically, the Network Hub, which we talked about earlier, is the organization that is coordinating this work, provides easy to understand data visualizations, and participants review the visualizations, discuss their observations, ask questions, and determine next steps for the intervention. Next slide. So the final phase in Plan, Do, Study, Act is ACT. And it's at this point that participants decide how to proceed with the intervention using their data analysis for guidance. Examples of what participants may choose to do is adapt the intervention further, adopt it. They may abandon it completely and say, this did not work, we're going to go in a completely different direction. Or they may expand it. Say you're working with 3rd graders on literacy. In our previous example, they may expand the intervention to 4th graders. Maybe it looks slightly different, but there's a larger group of students in the target audience. Or maybe there's one school in the district working on a problem and they decide to expand the same intervention to other schools in the district. Next slide. And then the process is repeated. Each PDSA cycle builds on the prior cycle, providing participants with the opportunity to continuously refine their intervention until they achieve the initial aim. Next slide. Okay, the final defining feature of a NIC, and this is what distinguishes it from other improvement processes. So it's not just improvement science, but it's improvement science carried out within a network. It's coordinated to accelerate the testing of interventions across varied contexts. I mentioned earlier that NICs are groups of individuals or organizations working on a common problem practice. So by working together, engaging in PDSA cycles and testing similar kinds of interventions to address the same problem of practice, participants are able to learn from one another about what works in different contexts. Next slide. And the way individuals and organizations learn from one another's experiences is through frequent NIC meetings in which participants come together, they compare results from PDSA cycles, and over time they begin to share their successes and failures, not just within the network, but to a broader group of colleagues outside the network. So that's an overview of NICs. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back to Marshall, who will contextualize these ideas by drawing on the specific experiences of the Iowa NIC.
All right, thank you, Amy. And thank you for those kind of detailed definitions and the explanation. I'll definitely be drawing on that as we talk through this, and we'll point to some specific examples where the work we're doing in Iowa really connects strongly with the model you discussed. So first, though, a little context. So this NIC is a partnership with the Central Rivers Area Education Agency in North Central Iowa and districts within that agency. And so Central Rivers is located in North Central Iowa, as I mentioned. If you could see me point to the screen, I would draw it there on the map for you. And they support the folks in that AEA, which an AEA is similar to like a regional agency or a county agency or any of those other intermediate agencies that exist in states. And they serve 66,000 students in over 70 schools, 18 counties, and over 9,000 square miles. I've been there many times. It's a large area folks in some districts are, will travel up to 2 hours to get to the AEA office to attend some of our coaching sessions or more. And so the whole idea behind this improvement community being networked, of working together across contexts, that really plays out in this situation based on kind of where everyone's located, the rural nature of many of the districts we're working with. And so as you can see here, the focus of our NIC is on educational technology, instructional technology, and explicitly we look at how we work with the NIC to look at how technology is integrated into classroom instruction. The districts involved have teams from the high schools in the district that come together as part of this NIC. And one of the key terms that you're going to hear me mention that I want to define for everybody really quick up front is SAMR. So we talk a lot about, we use the SAMR framework, SAMR, as a guidepost for how we're thinking about how technology integrates with instruction. And that stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So it's thinking about how technology changes the way you teach. Is it substituting, say, a word processing for using a pencil paper, or is it really redefining? Is it allowing teachers and students to engage in instructional activities that couldn't be imagined or done without that technology piece? And so when you hear me reference that model, that's what we're talking about. A couple of other contextual things. When Amy mentioned the hub here really is a partnership between REL Midwest and the AEA. So we, REL Midwest facilitators come in and we provide coaching and capacity building related to improvement science and related to educational technology. The AEA already has a role with these districts providing capacity building and coaching opportunities related to instructional technology, but they also play an essential function in really coordinating and making connections across the districts that they serve. I mean, they're an invaluable part of the hub as we operationalize the ideas of the NIC. And the districts, the teams from each school, are the learners and the improvers and the folks who are actually going through the process of defining problems, building plans for interventions, and engaging in plan, do, study, act cycles. To date, we have hit, we worked with 3 high schools, 3 districts in Iowa in the 2017-2018 school year, and we're continuing that work with some of them now. In the past school year, we worked with Northwood Kensett School District, Dagny Hartford, who our guest Joanna serves, and then BGM School District. And so we first started by defining a problem with the AEA related to instructional technology, as I mentioned before, and then we engaged everyone in the root cause analysis. And I won't read every little entry on this fishbone diagram to you, but this is a great example of how that played out. We got the group together. They brainstormed. We identified 6 different categories of root causes and several root causes within those categories, all related to that problem. From there, we continued to really unpack and define the problem by engaging in an exercise to build a theory of action, which is our logic model. Don't worry if you can't read all the words on these slides as I'm going through them, because I'm going through them pretty quickly so we can get to our panel, but note that as was shared in the chat, the recording will be available later. So we looked at program inputs, we looked at activities that were related to those inputs, all with this idea of SAMR and what instructional activities that are aligned along the SAMR spectrum should look like. We defined outputs for those activities and then expected outcomes from those activities and based on those outputs. We talked about our target as well. So our NIC members are the target. We want to have a common SAMR framework, common expectations for how teachers are to use instructional technology to, as some of our colleagues in the AEA say, swim in all lanes of the SAMR pool. So matching up appropriate instructional practices using technology with lesson and unit objectives and plans. And our overall goal, based as captured in our theory of action, is to have all teachers demonstrate understanding of SAMR framework and appropriate integration of technology by planning and developing instructional activities that reflect that understanding. So in the first year and cycles of this network improvement community, we're really focused on that planning piece and what it means to be intentional about using technology in instruction and planning appropriately for it. We engaged in our first PDSA cycle in winter and spring of 2018, and you can see here that we've captured some of the interventions and outcome measures that were used by our districts in the NIC. BGM, one of our districts, built a self-reflection activity and then used a Google form to collect data on kind of mapping how folks planned and identified SAMR levels in their plans, and then how accurate they were in identifying those levels. Dyke New Hartford did something similar, and Joanna's going to talk about what they did, but they really adapted a coaching model to identify SAMR levels and reflections. And Northwood Kensett used a lesson plan guide for teachers. And so what you can see across those three examples is what Amy touched on at the end of her presentation, which was all the districts were working on the same problem of practice. They were all working on this idea that we want to see a better integration of technology in classroom instruction and more appropriately aligned to both the SAMR levels in the SAMR framework and instructional goals. But because there were different contexts in each of the districts, they all had their own spin on that intervention, and all were able to test things slightly differently and gather different results. And what we did at the end of that cycle as the hub was we brought them all together, and they gave presentations on their PDSA cycle and the data and findings that they gathered. And it really spoke to that networked piece. The teams all shared successes and challenges and results, and I think everybody involved had something to say, like, oh, well, I will, in our next cycle, I'm going to do that, or can I get a copy of that protocol you use, because I think that fits well for the data we're trying to collect. So we really saw some good examples of the power of networking this group together as a community, and how that works. But I don't want you to hear all about it from me. So as we've said, we have Joanna Seymour, technology integrationist from Dyke New Hartford Schools, with us today. One of the NIC members. Thank you, Joanna, for joining us and for agreeing to participate today. Good to see your face.
Thank you. Good to see yours too.
Yes, and I should mention that we, Zoom, the platform we're using here, is a really critical part of our NIC because as we talked about at the beginning, districts are far apart. There's a big geography that we're separated by. We do a lot of virtual collaboration like this. So it's not uncommon for me to see Joanna or her peers on the NIC in a setting like this. So what we want to focus today on in this conversation is really your experience, Joanna. So I have some questions to start with, but feel free to share or ask questions back to me as we go through the panel. And then if you're out there as a participant and you want to hear us talk about something in more depth, or you ask a question of clarification, please put those in the chat and we'll field them. So the first question I have for you, Joanna, is really how did you first learn about this and about this NIC opportunity, and what made it sound appealing to you? Why did you, as a practitioner working in a school, feel like you were interested in participating?
So last year, in the early fall, our superintendent came to us offering this opportunity. A little background, about 2 to 3 times a year, we do a survey based on Clarity Bright Bites data, which gives us a snapshot of how our teachers and our students are using technology. And for years, we've kind of been stagnant. So it's not that they're not using it, but they're definitely not diving into the really robust ways of using technology with the 4 C's: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. So being offered this opportunity to take a dive into why we're not quite getting into those 4 C's and being able to do that with a community was really appealing.
Great, thank you. Now, when we started with the root cause analysis. So you talked about, you were being excited to kind of dive into this problem and an opportunity to kind of take something you were seeing in the data that you were collecting and address it. And so we convened for a root cause analysis. And how would you describe that? Was that different or similar, or what was that like as opposed to other decision-making processes you engage in your school?
I would say that the way that we dove into the problem with that root cause analysis was slightly different than anything I'd ever done. Being able to really break down all the individual pieces that might contribute to the reasons why we're not going deeper with technology was really helpful. And like you said, sometimes it seems like you're taking a lot of time to do that, but that time was invaluable in setting up like what might be the causes and where could we start to really make significant improvement toward solving that problem.
Thank you. And so was there any aspect or piece of that process that really stood out to you as powerful, or something that was uncovered through it that you hadn't crossed your mind, or something that somebody else shared?
Well, I think that the fact that we started out with our own school teams and saying like what we felt our issues were, and then finding out that we're not really alone, and that the other schools had very similar challenges that they were facing, and then being able to even see, okay, they're seeing this in this way, we're seeing this aspect in another way, and then having that conversation. So going from a smaller group to that larger group and expanding our view on the root causes for our challenge was super helpful. Great.
And one other thing that you mentioned earlier that I want to pull up, you said that it seemed like we did spend a lot of time working on defining the problem, and I can attest to that because I was at those sessions, and we did a root cause, we did a theory of action, we did take our time across multiple sessions, and how maybe was that? How does taking that time? How did it feel in the moment versus like when we got to the actual first cycle and you could start to see, those reasons why, right? How did that play out? What were your reactions there?
So I never really felt frustrated too much with the process, but I'm not the only person in my team. And so I think at some point, some people are thinking, well, why are we spending so much time doing this? We can just solve it by doing this. That isn't really the way that this process works. As most people know who are in the educational setting, reflection is extremely important. So actually taking time to dig and then dig again and ask more questions and really, really, really get to that root was valuable. And I think even though some might have been feeling frustrated at the beginning, as the picture came together and we came up with an actual plan, we all felt invested in it because we'd spent the time figuring out what could all the potential options be and choosing where we were going with it. But then we also felt pretty certain that the choices we made, how we were going to try to improve the depth of SAMR in our buildings, that it would actually probably take root and make a difference.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. We talk about kind of solutionitis sometimes. People want to jump right to that from problem to solution, and this is a nice example of what happens when you don't. The process if you're disciplined through the process, it helps you avoid that. So now we talked about all that, the time we spent doing that. we did actually get into developing an intervention and implementing it. And so, what was your role in developing the intervention that you all used and in the testing? Can you describe kind of the steps you took and how you were part of the team?
Yes, so I'm the technology integration coach for the district. So I have a natural role in being responsible for improving the use of technology at the times it's needed. But I'm also on our team was another instructional coach. So between the two of us and then two high school teachers that were invested in this process, we decided that the best way to really help all teachers start looking at what they're doing without overwhelming them, because I think we said before, you don't want to just add on something to your improvement processes. Our school had already been invested in authentic intellectual work, AIW, and part of that process of AIW is writing tasks and teaching tasks that actually have students doing more of the heavy lifting as far as them coming up with questions and designing their own outcomes and sharing. It actually dovetails beautifully with SAMR, because if you're really developing the kinds of lessons that ask kids to construct their learning and choosing the way they're going to share their learning, then they're probably going to choose technology tools that in a way that's not just paper pencil, that it's very much how are we reaching out and collaborating with the larger community, or how are we sharing our ideas and our learning with the larger community. So we decided together to build it into our coaching tool. So when we sit down with teachers and say, what are you trying to achieve with your students today? Where do you think that falls on the SAMR? That lends two openings. One, it asks teachers to evaluate really what do they want their students to do, and allows us as coaches to have them consider diving deeper with SAMR.
Awesome, thank you. So I really like how you explain how this fit into the work you're already doing in the building, and you talked a little bit about some of the things that you discovered through that process. Now, what else? I mean, what are other things you learned about how the teachers in the building are using technology or not, and the decision-making process around that?
So our teachers are working their tails off every single day. And sometimes, especially at the high school level, because technology has changed the way students learn so quickly, but not all teachers have been taught or learned in that same way. They tend to see their role sometimes as a much more traditional lecture response type of situation, instead of allowing students to do the research part of it, finding that content knowledge and guiding them to ask questions and dive deeper and come up with some sort of their own solutions to these deep questions that we face as communities, individuals, countries. And so what we've learned is that we have a lot of work to do with our teachers as far as not just learning how to use technology, but also how to design their own instruction that puts more of the work, the learning, the challenge on the students, rather than saying, learn this and tell me what you learned.
Awesome, thank you. And related to that, so you mentioned earlier, and Amy really mentioned this idea that when we think of an intervention, we think about like some big program implementation or some curriculum. And in the NIC, we were really talking about a much smaller grain solution to the problem. So we're addressing a root cause through a small intervention. How was that different for you or for the teachers on your team than other past examples of implementing some sort of intervention to solve a problem?
Well, I think just on the basis of how that root cause analysis works and how you helped guide us as well, um, we sometimes throw a lot of stuff at the wall, if that makes any sense. Like, we'll try
Yeah.
this, we'll try this, we'll try this. And you get so many initiatives going that you're really just swimming in circles. And so by focusing, like, okay, we need our teachers, to understand those levels of technology integration and how and why it's important to swim what you said earlier, swim the laps, meaning sometimes there are cases where you need those substitution activities or the lower level technology integration. But for really impactful learning to happen, you've got to be able to get into those deeper levels of SAMR. And so by saying, okay, let's focus on the teachers, can they identify SAMR? And not just that, how are they using it? And can they really say, this is a modification because, or this is a substitution because? No matter what level they're at, can they recognize it so that when they're making those educational learning choices, they're making them for the right reasons?
Awesome. I love the way you described that. Okay, changing pace a little bit. You know, we did bring you all together with other districts, and we had some collaborative opportunities. What are some of your takeaways or learning experiences from collaborating with the other districts in this way? Not just coming together like an in-service, but actually going through a process together.
Many minds. You know, I guess there's a saying that the smartest person in the room is the room. So being able to tear apart a question and get lots of voices and lots of ideas around that question, I think gave us a much better direction than us taking our own biases and just going with something.
Yeah, awesome, great. And finally, I think the one thing I think a lot of folks would like to know related to that, and just the process and the experience overall. So if you are an educator or a leader in a building or in a district if I were thinking an educator or a leader thinking about integrating network improvement communities as part of my school improvement plan or part of a department plan, what advice would you have for me in doing so?
Well, number one, you need to make sure that all the people that are involved in this are on board. And again, when we started, I think that we sort of were told we had to do it. Luckily, the people that chose to be a part of it were very invested in the belief that this would help improve our community. And so if that had not happened, I think it would have been an utter failure. So making sure administration and teachers, all participants are on board would be number one. And then the enough time and guidance to allow those participants to be able to come up with a plan that they believe in, therefore can be faithful to it once it's in place.
Great. Thank you. Joanna, again, really appreciate you coming and chatting with me about this today. Now, we are going to transition a little bit to some Q&A. And so we've had some questions submitted in the chat, and if you haven't submitted one yet, you can feel free to still do so. So I'm going to read them out, and then between you, me, and Amy, I think we can all take a shot at answering these. So looking here first, the first question I see for our panel as I try and navigate up in the chat. After determining what might address the problem of practice, how did you support rigor and fidelity in practice and gathering evidence? And so this is a really great question, and it's a tricky one, right? Because one, when we met with our Nick in the coaching session where our goal was to design these implementation and data collection plans, we wanted to really key on a couple of things. We wanted the data collection to be be relatively low burden, right? We didn't want this to, that part of it to derail everything else, right? We wanted it to be something that practitioners involved in the NIC could really own, right? They had control over collecting it. They had the means to do it. They would understand the information that was coming in, and it was really kind of contextual. And so while we focused on rigor and fidelity in terms of making sure our measures were really aligned with the intervention we were trying to do. So we're focused on planning, and we're focused on accuracy of identifying SAMR in planning. And so what we had to balance that, kind of give the freedom to the participating teams to design the way they were going to collect the data and look at the data in a way that aligned with that, but also aligned with their context in their building. Joanna, anything you would add about that part of the experience?
Well, to add to what you just said, we are already collecting data when we do our coaching cycles. And so this was a really natural fit to just add in one more piece of conversation about SAMR. Being able to, not just teach a one-time thing about what is SAMR, but then being really able to have those individual conversations with teachers has made their understanding of SAMR and their use of SAMR much more effective.
All right. A second question, I think this one is good for you, Amy, which is, could you reflect on the optimal size of a productive NIC? How many educators, schools, or districts could a hub effectively support? Mm-hmm. And, could you envision creating cross-state NICs?
Yes, this is a great question. It's a really hard question to answer. I don't know what the answer is, because I've seen a lot of different configurations of NICs that have worked well. Just to give a few examples, I've seen some that are really just within one school district, and there's multiple schools, and that forms the NIC, and they're all, in close proximity, easy to communicate. But I've also seen, for example, there's a Better Math Teaching Network in New England, and it's comprised of teachers in every single New England state. I've seen other NICs. The Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching runs a community college NIC that has really a large number of community colleges in it. I don't know the exact number. I wish I did, but surprisingly large. And so I think there's all sorts of different kinds of configurations, and they can all work, but it's really heavily dependent on how they're facilitated and the kind of technology you use to facilitate the NIC. So Marshall and Joanna talked about using the Zoom platform, and I've seen other kinds of platforms used as well, and those platforms used so that you can meet virtually, because it's not realistic to expect people to travel to have meetings in person, so for virtual meetings. But also there's other platforms that can help members continuously update one another about their progress, check in, share material. So there's lots of different options and lots of different ways of implementing NICs.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mean, one of the things I have observed with this group is that it really, another factor is the strength of the hub. In this instance, we're working with, instructional coaches like Joanna and teachers in buildings, and there's some challenges there, right? I mean, anytime we want to bring everyone together for a face-to-face, we've got to be able to find a common time for everybody, a common location. The people in the buildings have to find subs for the teachers and leaders that are going to be out of the building that day. And we couldn't do that without the support of the AEA as part of the hub and a coordinator there. And so that's, that the strength of that is really crucial to that aspect. And you mentioned some technology, and the third question that came up says, how else did NIC members share and learn with each other? Was there ongoing interaction? And then I see, there's a question down below here about a typical agenda. And these, these are really related. And so we worked to blend face-to-face and online collaborative opportunities. I mean, we couldn't have done it without it, right? And so we saved kind of the face-to-face opportunities, you know, these kind of most of a day. I think we typically do 9 to 2 p.m. For the big picture stuff, for the root cause, for developing the theory of action, for kicking off PDSA cycles, and then convening everybody at the end to share the data. In between that, we use, and this is also, again, speaking to the strength of the hub facilitated by the AAA, we use Zoom, we use Google Hangouts, and try to do these short check-ins facilitated by me or by the AEA or as a whole group to really serve that purpose of keeping the conversation going between those meetings, making sure that people have an opportunity to share how their implementation of their PDSA cycle is going, some challenges they're experiencing, ask questions of the group. So and that also keeps everybody focused. While we've worked really hard with our districts to embed this in stuff they're already doing, it is a different way of doing work for them. And so we want to recognize this does require some effort. And providing the ongoing support, but also providing that check saying, oh, we have this meeting, you know, coming up. We need to make sure that we're keeping up with our implementation plan, I think helps. And we do those either before school or after school. So I've enjoyed getting up and attending those web meetings at 7 a.m. on some days and 7:30 a.m. and you know, getting camera ready for those sessions. And that's been really valuable to work around the schedules of the group. And I don't know if that answers the agenda question, but you know, we try to do some community building at the front end of all of our agendas. So we always, I mean, I'm loath to call them icebreakers, but we always check in with everybody and see how they're doing as people, right? So what we know about the research on like things like communities of practice is their social things, right? And the social part's really important. You need to build the connections as people before you can build the connections as practitioners. And that helps build that trust. I mean, people are in these events are talking about, you know, struggles in their buildings and problems they're having and things they're trying to solve. And without that trust element, you know, that's a challenge. So I would say, in addition to, you know, facilitating process pieces and having collaborative planning time, those social interactions and trust building and community building exercises are really important. I want to be mindful of time and race through a couple more questions. So question 5 here, when teachers were implementing an initiative, were they all doing the same or did they have different ones and compare outcomes? So I'll take a first crack at this, and Joanna, you can add anything else. But, you know, depends on, so across the 3 teams, the implementation and the initiative looked slightly different. Yeah, we were all working on that same problem. We were all working on accuracy of SAMR identification and planning, but each district had a different twist to it. And that allowed us to kind of see what things worked in different contexts and also kind of, you know, build the wisdom of the room, right? One group may have thought of something and put it in place that another group didn't, and then they could learn from each other. Joanna, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say just that. Probably the most impactful part was after we had done the work the first year and came back and shared what we had done, learning solutions that the other schools had tried that we hadn't even thought of, and thought, oh, well, that would be a really nice addition to what we're doing to help collect, or they're doing it differently and they're collecting their data slightly differently. That's maybe not how we do it, but we're still getting really valuable data. It was just great to learn from the other schools.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you know, I mean, I think in a perfect world when we're talking about, you know, and we're not. I don't know if we're talking about like generalizability or whatever here, but you know, you would want to do the same exact thing in the same exact conditions. And that's just not how it plays out in the real world in buildings all the time. And we want to recognize that and work towards the common problem. Oh yeah.
But the one thing I did notice, we're all gathering very similar data. just in different ways.
Oh yeah, yeah, perfect point. That's right. I think there were a couple of findings that everybody saw, I think particularly around like the number of activities that were coded or identified as S, was a lot higher than I think people anticipated.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Just scanning the chat to see if there are any other questions. I think we've hit them, and that we're Emily and others are sharing some great information in the chat with links to a lot of the different information we're talking about and reference points. So before we move to close for the day, Amy or Joanna, anything else you would add for the good of the group related to the questions or the content today?
I would say I was just really honored to be part of this group. It helped our district move forward in a way that we hadn't anticipated before getting involved.
Yep, and I'll just add that I feel like networked improvement communities are somewhat new in education, and we just keep learning about how to get better at running them, and it's been a really fun process, and it's great to share some of those experiences with all of you.
Great, thank you both for that. So we are about at time for the day, and we want to honor everybody's time and the commitment to stay and listen. So first, though, Amy and Joanna, thank you once again for your contributions today, and thank you all for the questions that help make this panel and this Q&A really interactive and had a lot of great information. So before we go, a lot of this I think is already in the chat, but these are some additional resources on networked improvement communities that are available to you. We've got a REL Midwest report. There's a resource roundup on NICS and continuous improvement research, a principles reflection, which I think is a blog post, and then we have a podcast about another NIC that REL Midwest facilitated in Michigan. So I'd encourage you all to take some time and take a look at those if you're interested in learning more. And also I want to make sure to plug REL Midwest on Twitter and visit on our website URL. Both are full of great information like what we shared today and what was shared in the chat. And so please go ahead and check those out. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't plug our survey. So if you haven't done so already, please either click the link on the screen, I think it's interactive, or in the chat, and give us some feedback on how things went. We'd love to hear from you and need to hear from you on how this went as an event, what you learned, and your experience. So please take time to do that. It's great information for us to have. All right, and with that, again, I want to thank our panelists, Joanna and Amy, for joining us today. Here's our information for you if you're interested in following up with us, contacting us about anything we talked about today. Please feel free to do so. And that is it. So thanks again. I appreciate everyone's time. Have a great evening and a great rest of your week.